Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Protegrity. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead of us, but just before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. First off, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of the event or you'd like to share it with a friend, you will have access to the recording after the on-demand or after the presentation concludes today. Second, I'd like to point your attention to the right side of your screen, and you'll see a chat tab and a Q&A tab. We want you to utilize these places to talk with us, talk with each other, and make sure to send your questions in for Ulf today. And finally, we have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards that we will be performing at the end of the webinar today. So stay tuned to the end to see if you're one of our 4 lucky winners. But let's go ahead and kick off our webinar today. The topic is controlling privacy and the use of data assets. And I'm joined today by Ulf Mattsson, Chief Security Strategist and founder of Protegrity. It's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Ulf at this point in time to get us started. Ulf, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. And the topic is my passion. This is what I typically do. Let me see if I can get a full screen. Okay, so I think that data privacy is becoming more and more important. And my view is that data and even more trust, consumer trust, is becoming a key, the new, maybe not oil, but the new world currency. So if we look at a scenario where you have different people in your organization, some of them will be looking at risk. Other people will look at opportunities. And then you have people that are focusing on compliance, regulations. You have people that are looking at cost. And I think the key aspect is to find the balance. Finding a balance between these different aspects, different groups. And I think the most important thing that we are maybe missing today is to communicate. So we have these different groups that all the way from our board, C-level people, and different teams in the organization. And what I'm usually finding is that there's a lack of common way to communicate, lack of language that we can convey from technical people up to the executives, a lack of framework that we can use when we communicate. And when I say framework, there are so many different frameworks, but each organization should pick a framework that makes sense. Maybe from NIST, which is my favorite in many cases. And then communicate in those terms. So you have defined terms in in the framework, and you can effectively communicate. When I talk about balance, some people look at privacy, other people look at security, and then we have people that are focusing on compliance. So compliance are typically checklists where you check that you measure if you are compliant to different controls. And you have privacy policies, GDPR, and other regulations. You have the California CCPA, and you implement security controls in applications, in databases, and I like to talk about these different things. When you implement data protection, there's always a balance between how much security do you want, depending on the data and the exposure. What environment is that data exposed in? Is it in cloud? Is it on mobile devices? And on the other side, you have usability. We have a business to run, so you need to support business use cases, and there is a need for transparency in many cases. You may not want to change your applications or change your databases, so finding that balance is critical. And for example, you have a couple of controls listed here: access control, masking, monitoring, and more. So for each type of data, for each use case, you can use a combination of these different controls to find the best balance between your security needs and your operational usability needs, performance, and other aspects. So how should you start? Some of these controls could be harder. And for example, fine-grained encryption can be hard. Access control, masking can be less costly. So you may want to start from the left. Implement easy and quick controls. And over time, you can add more advanced controls going into tokenization and fine-grained encryption, and find the balance that works for your risk appetite. So you need to do a risk assessment in the organization, and then you can start and implement different controls and tools. What is the environment we are living in? On the left-hand side, we have the corporate, where you have control in that environment, and you own the hardware, you have security people that are implementing your different security tools. In the middle, you have cloud. So the yellow box here is representing something that is outsourced. and you have a contract. So you have some level of control, but we know that you typically don't have full transparency on who can access the data you put in the cloud. So it's kind of a middle ground. When it goes over to the right-hand side, you have shadow IT. We are seeing more and more users starting to use applications in environments that corporate is not controlling or aware of. And we're also seeing more data being downloaded to working from home. So your home office, your mobile environments are starting to host more and more sensitive data. So if you are allowing download of data from the left-hand side over to the two right-hand sides, local or to cloud, you can take the measure of protecting data using different best practices, different ways to mask and tokenize and protect data. So in case you have a data breach in any of these different environments, you know that there's some level of protection. Data is basically protected regardless of what is happening in the application. If the data is stolen, you know that you can have a certain level of protection on that data. Security is always a layered approach, but the basic foundation of having data locked down and secured can give you a good way to assure that regardless of how your system is attacked, there's a basic level. We'll talk more about that. We have different things. Let me see if I can adjust my screen here. So what people are saying, this is from ISC Square. They did a recent study and asked, what are the barriers for establishing good defenses against attacks? And they saw that budgeting is not at the top. They saw that tools is not a main concern. They concluded that awareness, communication, skill are at the top. So my conclusion here is that we need to be better at educating and building our skills, because the tools and the budgets are available. This is Gartner data. So you can see on the right-hand side, it's a scale of percentage security spending of your IT budget. And it goes from 3% up to 9%. So you can see financial institutions, they are at the top. And on the left-hand side, you can see that education and some other organizations are not spending much on security compared to financial institutions. And on the left-hand side, you can see a scale from Verizon, their annual report, where they put different industries and counted number of security incidents. And when you look at this landscape, you can see an interesting pattern. On the right-hand side, you can see that banks and finance, they have a lower number of incidents. They are the security posture is typically higher than many other industries. Some industries are less regulated, and if you look at the number of security incidents, you can ask the question, are certain industries here not spending enough on security? You have healthcare, for example, in the middle, and we are seeing ransomware are increasingly hitting healthcare and other less protected environments. So my thinking when I look at this pattern, maybe some industries like healthcare should spend more on security. This is a similar picture. We have security spending at the bottom again. And this is from CrowdStrike, where they, on the left-hand side, have a scale of data leaks. What industries had more data leaks? So you can see an interesting pattern here also. You have financial services on the right-hand side. And as we said, they spend more on security, and they have typically a better security posture. They are more traditionally regulated. And when you look on the left-hand side, you have industries like healthcare, manufacturing, retail that had more data leaks. And my reflection here is that these industries, they are spending less on security than, for example, tech, the major tech companies, financial services. So I think we can learn from this picture. This is an example of a use case. Here you have different type of data that is credit card data, and at the bottom you have a user that is analyzing that data. So the use case here is that they manage to protect the data in a way that it gave very good data quality. So you can see the numbers here. They reduced the risk from 26% down to 8%. And there are tools that can help you measure that. You have different type of k-anonymity and differential privacy and other established models that can help you calculate what is your risk level. And then you can fine-tune different parameters so you get the good balance. For example, here you have very good data quality after protecting the data, and you reduce the risk level. So in the architecture here, you can see that data came from different databases loaded into a cloud, and then was used in machine learning models. So this is a use case that is becoming more and more important and used by, for example, in this case, financial institutions. Protect your data. I typically find that they are saying that before going to cloud with sensitive data, we need to protect the data. So here's an example about the balance. How should I protect the data before sending it to cloud? And I still want the utility so I can use my data. This is an example of analytics data. The use case we talked about on the previous slide. Some data at the bottom can be left in clear. It's not at risk. And then you move up the stack. So you can see synthetic data. You may want to replace some data with synthetic data to be compliant and not have exposure. Synthetic data, you can calibrate. So you derive some of your business data into synthetic data. And you can also complement that with complete fake data. So you find a model that is lowering your risk. And then you move up. You may want to take some identifiers at the top and replace those identifiers so you can get the data back if you need it. But the identifiers are protected, for example, tokenized or encrypted. And then in the middle here, we may want to anonymize some attributes and add noise and protect those attributes. So this is what it can look like in a data analytics system. Here we have an example from AWS, Amazon AWS, where security on the left-hand side here is controlling the protection of the data before it goes into cloud. And in this case, you are using an agent that is encrypting the data before sending it into, in this case, Amazon AWS S3 buckets. And encryption keys are controlled on the left-hand side, and you can decide if you want to share encryption keys for some of the data with the cloud environment, or if you want to keep the encryption keys under your tight control, so the encryption keys never are exposed to the cloud environment. So here you have a couple of options to apply different controls based on your risk appetite and what type of data and use case you are looking at. We talked about agents, and here you have on the left-hand side a CASB which is basically an encryption gateway, a cloud access security broker, where you can hold your key and never expose that key outside your control. And that CASB could be an appliance. It can be hosted in a private cloud. It's a way to keep very tight control. So we are saying that the control of data is high. And then you move to far right. So we talked about Amazon AWS. So far right, I'm saying that if you allow AWS to do your key management, you have less control. And in the middle, you have different models. If in the middle you have bring your own key, meaning that it's like we talked about previously here, that you share the key, you manage the encryption keys, but you share the keys with the cloud. So that is kind of the middle ground here. And then you have on the left-hand side, we talked about the CASB, and you can have an agent running in the cloud, for example, an agent that is holding on to your key. So the key is not exposed in the infrastructure in cloud. So you have a pretty high level of control there. But the operation is happening on the cloud platform compared to a CASB, where the operation is happening before the data is sent to the cloud. So the agent could be a database agent in Snowflake, for example, an agent that is performing crypto operations. So here we have a kind of a summary how the architectures could look. In the middle, we have the CASB and the agent. And on the right-hand side, you can see different typical implementation platforms. In the Hadoop, mainframe, file systems, databases. We talked about Snowflake seconds ago. And on the left-hand side, we have the security control, where you manage your encryption. You may have a hardware security module, an HSM that is protecting some of your top encryption keys. And you have a separation of duties here. So you have a security officer on the left-hand side that is responsible for configuring, auditing, key management, and other things, controlling whatever is happening on the platforms on the right-hand side. This is a use case that is becoming more and more frequent, I would say. You can see in the middle you have the Lambda function. We talk about serverless functions, and they are scaling and performing very well. So we are seeing more and more customers, organizations that want to optimize cloud scalability, cloud performance, and they turn into Lambda functions. On other cloud platforms, they are named differently, but they are basically serverless functions. So they can perform better than, for example, containers, and of course they are not portable. So if you use a Lambda implementation, you cannot port that to other cloud platforms or to your on-prem. So it's a balance there. If you need scalability, you may go to that type of implementation. If you need portability, you may use containers. And again, on the left-hand side, you can see the key management and the security control. And in the middle, you can see hold your own key. That is an example of an agent that is keeping the key, not exposing the key to your cloud platform. And it's a very interesting configuration option where you can utilize benefits of the cloud, but still have a high level of control of your encryption processes and keys. I would like to show you a draft copy of a book that CRC Press is publishing on the topics that we talked about today. And here you can see the table of contents outlining risks, implementations, aspects, different type of platforms, a lot about analytics and cloud. And then you have at the bottom some regulations and governance discussions. So it's about 500 pages, and it's volume 1. So I will come out with a volume 2 later on this year. Volume 1 will be published in April timeframe. And this is kind of a summary of the book, a couple of key points. And I would like to thank you very much for the attention here. And please read my book. And it gives a lot more context to the topics I brought up here today. So thank you very much.
All right, so that is the end of the presentation, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and read out our Amazon gift card winners, and just to give you guys a couple more seconds to send in any questions that you might have for Ulf. So our 4 winners of the $25 gift card drawing. Our first winner is Mushir M. Our second winner is Kurai G. Our third winner is Jennifer E. And our fourth and final winner is Sarah P. So congratulations to the 4 of you. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. And if you don't find that email, just check your spam folder. So I'm looking through our chats and the Q&A tabs, and I'm not seeing any more questions that came in today, Ulf. So if you have any final closing remarks, anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we officially sign off, I'll go ahead and give you that chance now.
Yeah. We talked about my book, and I think if you are interested in the different areas that I touched on today, take a look at the book. And if you would like to review my draft before it is published in April, send me an email or contact me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a discussion about what you think about the content. You are muted.
Thank you. 2022, and we're still staying muted. Thank you so much for your presentation today. A quick reminder that today's session was recorded. So following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You'll also find the recording living on the Security Boulevard website. So just visit securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. So Ulf, again, thank you so much for taking the time to put together this webinar. I'd like to thank Protegrity for sponsoring today's webinar. And finally, I would like to thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of today's presentation. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have an excellent day, everyone.
Thank you. Stay safe.